First off, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for finding time today to join us to mark the launch of a new parent-led initiative called Education, Not Taxation, Parents Against School Fee VAT. I would especially like to thank Mrs. Christine Cuniff and her team at LDS Ascot for accepting to host us for this event today. My son is a student here in year 6. And so we have formed a parent-led group, which is a non-political group, it's non-party group, and we are united around our concern as independent school parents and supporters around the effects that school fee VAT will have on education. Let me just introduce myself and how we got here today. So I am Tony Perry, and I am a very proud father. I was my wife Kate, who is just over there, of 2 young children, a 10-year-old boy who is a student in year 6 here at LDS Ascot, and a 9-year-old girl, just turned 9 last week, in a state school in Maidenhead. Now, my son also started his schooling in a state school, and from the very beginning, he was struggling with reading and writing, and we were getting worried about his progress. By the end of year 2, he was tested and diagnosed with having ADHD, and so we were working very closely with his teachers, teaching assistants, and they were doing the best with the resources that they had to support him. But even so, he continued to fall behind. And so naturally, as parents, we were very worried about that and worried about what our options might be. Above all, actually, you can go to the next slide, sorry, I moved ahead myself there. But above all, we were afraid that as he went through his school, he would just get moved through. He would get moved into one of the state secondary schools, and then in essence written off, because there are so many children and so many with different needs and so many with even more complicated needs. And so it worried us greatly. And so we had debated about whether moving him to an independent school over a few years in his time in primary school, and in the end decided to move him here to LDS Ascot at the start of year 5. And so there were 3 reasons that we did that, why we chose LDS Ascot in particular. There were many fine schools in our area, but there were 3 things that stood out for us. Number 1 is that LDS Ascot has a good reputation of a nurturing environment and also support for children with learning differences. So that clearly resonated for us. The second reason is that LDS Ascot is a through school. He was already in year 5. So trying to move him again in just a couple of years' time would be even more disruption. He would never really settle in to the new school before moving yet again. So the idea of being able to move him here and him being able to settle and be at home and just focus on learning and growing, that was very important to us. And then the third part, and I think with most parents in independent schools, this will be a major part, we could afford it. With careful planning, sacrifice, we would be able to do it. So we looked at the overall fees and its plan and decided, okay, we can make this work. And so for those 3 reasons, we chose LDS Ascot. So looking back, he's been there for a year, and we're coming into half term for the 2nd year now. And he is just transformed in terms of his learning. You know, we've gone from a boy who doesn't like to look at books at all and is struggling to get sounds and words, to being able to read. He's not a fan of it, but he will do it. And I am impressed when, you know, he reads to me in the evening and he's seeing these larger words and it's just coming together. And his writing as well. It's not easy for him. We found in year 5 that in addition to ADHD, he also has dyslexia and also dysgraphia. So, which means basically not only do the words not translate into sound, the phonics bit of reading, but also trying to get letters out onto paper isn't coming out right either, right? But the support that he received here has been phenomenal. He has had a Senko, which of course as independent school parents we have had to pay for, right? But he has had that support, and also in the classroom, his teachers have been very accommodating to his learning styles, and that's what made the difference for him. That and the class sizes and just the overall environment and expectations of the school. So we rested happy, confidently knowing that he is in good hands. And I will say that we also did this knowing that our daughter was in good hands as well. I think I mentioned she is in a state school right now. She is in a very good primary school in which she is very happy. In secondary school or senior school, she is able to apply to 2 grammar schools that we're in catchment of, as well as having a very good comprehensive girls' school within walking distance of us. So we are very happy in terms of the options that she has, and she's thriving, and we believe that she too will thrive. And as any parent, we want our children to make the most of the educational opportunities that they have. So we were very happy in our path. And then we learned about Labor's plans of introducing school fee VAT. If you go to the next slide. And this is something that will hurt, certainly families like me. We are debating and juggling. We certainly want to continue his studies here at LDS. That's very much our plan. But it's a struggle, right? And so with a lot of the uncertainties going on, we've also had to go through the process of applying into secondary schools in the state sector because he's in year 6. So we're going through that natural transition. So we have to have a plan B because we just don't know what's going on. And there are many other families like us, and I knew that, but I felt like those voices weren't being heard. There were too many caricatures of all independent schools as being these wealthy enclaves of parents having their Rolls Royces and Aston Martins, all of them, and 3 houses in 3 continents, or whatever the case may be, in which case it's like, well, what's the big deal about VAT? It's really, people may not like to pay money, no one likes to, but can they afford it? Sure they can. And will they stay where they are even if they grumble a bit? Sure they will. And so I felt we needed to broaden the conversation. We needed more voices here about people who actually are going to be affected by this. People who, frankly, like my wife and I, who wake up at 3 in the morning at times and wonder, okay, how are we going to do this again? And we're not alone. And so to that end, I launched a campaign on change.org back in October that called on Labor to stop them from doing this, because at the end of the day, they are hurting children. They will force children out of schools that they know and love, environments where they feel safe, environments where they're learning, right? They're going to lose their friends. It's going to be far harder to do that, right? And they're going to go into schools that they don't know. They're going to go to schools we don't know. And if they have the additional challenge of education needs, in my own case, then how well will that school be able to manage it? We've already been there. We started with that. And then the last thing that we as parents want to do is to undo that progress that we are seeing in our child. So therefore we launched this. And in the first week, 37,000 parents and supporters signed their support. It slowed down a little bit when the Middle East situation started to come, and naturally the focus started to look elsewhere. I'm pleased to say that it's growing again now. This slide I took is actually a bit out of date. We now have over 58,000 people who have signed it, and that number is growing. And it's not only about the number of people who are signing this, it's actually the stories that so many of them are leaving behind, whether by video or by text. And I want to read a couple of those to you now, just a selection of them. If you can go to the next slide, please. And I say, these are just 2, and there are many. There are many. So the first one, and I'm just going to read it directly. My son has been severely bullied through primary school. I am sending him to private schools as I feel my choices are limited, and he may well be bullied within a mainstream school, which in turn will mean his mental health suffers. I do not agree with Labour's proposal, and it is not just the rich who sacrifice all they have to make this decision. I work in education, and I know the consequences of sending your child to a school which is not right for them. I will say I had a chat with someone here, and they were mentioning similar concerns about a child being bullied and the reason that they had moved them out of a state school into an independent school. So again, this person is not alone. There are many out there. The second one, I am an autistic single mom of a 6-year-old boy who has been waiting 2 years for his autism diagnosis and speech and language therapy. I sent him to an independent school because he simply wouldn't have his needs met in a state school. In order to be able to do this, there are certain sacrifices that have to be made, e.g. not going on holidays, etc. But I am prepared to do this, as it means that my son is in a school that he is happy and thriving in. So what that told me looking through this is that we are not alone. And that meant a lot for us. The other part that it told me is that families across the country are making a range of choices for their children's educational needs. So much of this conversation is around independent versus state, as if state is one homogeneous group and independent one homogeneous group. But it is far more complicated than that. And any of one of you who ever were starting into reception or going into senior school, whether in the independent or state sector, I'm sure can vouch for that, right? As you go through and meeting with different schools, having different open days, and making that vital choice about where is the best place for your son or daughter. And the point here is that families are using their resources, however much or little that they've got, to try to help make those choices work. Independent school is just one option, right? Other families are buying homes in the catchment areas of popular state schools, others or tutoring their children for the 11 plus to get in grammar schools. And that has not been in the conversation at all. These are all fine schools. These are all fine schools, and they all have their strengths. And I think it's important to recognize the richness of the educational system that we have here in the United Kingdom. And that ought to be something that is celebrated and encouraged and grown. But at the moment, we're in a situation where some schools are being pitted against others. And that is not going to help anyone. I think we all can agree that the education system as a whole could use reform and improvement. And I think we all agree that as parents, everyone should be able to have the opportunity to have a good education wherever that they might be. But pitting one school against another, one type against another, parents against each other, is not going to get us there. It is quite simply around being able to learn from each other, whether in state or independent schools, and even within those, and seeing what different schools are doing to address different challenges. I could have a whole other conversation on that, but I won't now. But it's that sort of thing where we can, I think, learn from each other and collectively improve the educational system, and therefore actually prepare the country for the economy of the future, and also the societies of the future. And so those are very important points that I do want to try to make. Now the other part of this is that I want to come back a bit to Labour's own rationale to this, and I'm not trying to get into party politics. I want to make that very clear. But what I do want to make are 2 points. Number one, if you go to the next slide, please. Sir Keir Starmer has promised working families across this country that we will do nothing to increase the burden on working people, whether it comes to tax or anything else. And he says they paid a heavy price for the incompetence of the government after the last 13 years. Now, I won't comment in terms of the last part, but we have all struggled for a whole host of reasons, whether it's the pandemic, cost of living crisis, and many other challenges, right? And I think that is a point on which we can all agree. Now the second point is the next slide, was Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves. She herself has said, look, the tax burden is its highest in 60, maybe 70 years. And she says, I don't see a route to funding public services that is through taxing our way there. It is going to be by growing our way there. And so what that tells us is that we're, on one hand, we have to grow our way. In other words, grow the overall economic pie so that as we all grow, there's more money that's also coming into Treasury and being able to fund and drive growth. But yet they've chosen a policy that is actually going to be regressive, I would argue, in the sense that you're trying to raise funds that may well not materialize. They are basing this policy in terms of assumptions that were made in part by the Institute for Fiscal Studies. And if you take a look at those assumptions, they're not adding up. And in fact, the IFS paper itself, if you read buried into it, I think it's page 25, it says, look, there is so much uncertainty here. We cannot actually predict the differences within independent schools, the effects between the school types, the communities, and so on. That these are basically estimates, but we can't actually predict on this, right? There's a lot of uncertainty. Now that gets missed in the headline where they say, well, you know what, only 3 to 7% of students are actually going to leave. Everyone else will just be able to afford to eat the cost. It's no big deal. But the other part of it, there's also some math challenges, which I will only touch on briefly, but I do think it's relevant. So they are assuming a couple of things. Number one, when you read back through it, they're looking at activity from the noughts, so the early 2000s, if you will, and then I think the 10s, but certainly in the 2000s, and looking at price inflations for independent schools as that's gone up. But here's the thing. Number one, those increases were happening over several years. We have not had a circumstance where 20% increases happen at once. So that kind of gradual modeling, when people's wages were also going up and it was a bit easier to juggle things, it doesn't hold. The second part of it is it doesn't account for what's happened since the early 2000s, right? We've had economic crisis. We've had obviously the pandemic. We have had the cost of living crisis that all households in one way or another are worried about. I don't know anyone who's not worried about what's going to happen with the price of energy, for example. Yeah. No, not at all, please. I don't know anyone who is not worried about those sorts of things in one way or another. And of course, trying to balance school fees in the mix of that too. We are all, in however wealthy or not that we may be, are worried about this, right? Just like every other family in the country. This is a real live issue. And so that means that we are going to be more sensitive to what happens with rises. So just tacking 20% onto school fees will have a bigger effect. And so when you have circumstances like this, so when the paper on which this policy is grounded is saying, look, we don't actually know what's going to happen, but this is something that could happen, and when you have an unusual circumstance, which I would call putting up to 20% onto school fees an unusual circumstance, then you have got to look at data on the ground. In my day job, I'm an analyst. I work in the NHS, so I do a lot of work around benchmarking and that sort of thing, and working with data. And the one thing that I have learned is when you don't have strong assumptions that you can't actually validate, you have got to test out what you have. You've got to listen on the ground. And who's on the ground? It is parents of children with independent schools. It is the independent schools themselves. And so you need to have conversations with the people that are ultimately the parents making these decisions and the schools that are trying to accommodate and juggle to make ends meet on their end as well. And so we are already being told by some schools that they could lose up to 1/3 of parents. There was an article in the Telegraph just recently about that. Now think about that. Look in your students' classes and think about 1/3 of them gone. And then think about what that could mean for certain schools even. Not every school would be able to absorb that very well. There was another piece, I believe, in Litchfield that was worried about cathedral schools. So these are very specialist schools, right? Training choristers and so on. And it's its own culture, its own community. And they're very worried. There was an article in The Guardian, I believe last summer, about a Welsh school, I think in London. And they too were worried about the effects of this, right? These were people that were not trying to go into independent school because they expect to become the next barons or the like, but they have a love of their culture, of Welsh culture, and they want to connect their child to that. Now, I, as an immigrant myself, I'm Native American, I'm a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, I understand that one all too well. And I try to teach my children slowly, but their tribal language and their culture, and like having a school where you could do that is amazing, right? And so parents are choosing their schools, as we've said, for a whole wide range of reasons. And so you have got to listen on the ground. The last point I'll make on the maths is this before I move on. The last point I will make is if you read the IFS paper, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, what they say is if parents decide, because they don't have a choice, to take their child out of their independent school, then they will simply continue using that money they quote save to just buy stuff. That you're all going to go to the shops and go buy things, and therefore, if you know however much school fees are, all of that money you're going to go buy things, and all of that gets 20% VAT, so the government's none the worse. They actually said that. And I can imagine if I had asked, I'm not going to try that, but if I had asked in this room how many people are going to just use all of their savings to blow it in the shops, I don't actually see too many hands up, and I don't think I will. So it comes back into reality. Grounding assumptions on reality is a critical part of analytics and making especially such vital policy decisions. So that's how we got here today. And to that end, I would like to tell you about our next step with this. So we've launched a website, which I'll show you shortly, not just yet, but I will show you shortly as a website to help broaden this conversation. And so what I am asking all of you and everyone in the country is, as hard as it is, because we, parents of independent schools don't like to talk about money anyway, let alone, this is not a comfortable conversation to have. I think as being British people, we just get on, right? We just get on with our lives and get on with things. So this isn't the easiest of conversations to have. But what I would ask each of you is to think about how, raising this in your communities, whether it's in local papers, national papers, also Facebook groups, have these conversations and say, at the end of the day, whatever you might think around independent schools or grammar schools or others, we're talking about children. And we're talking about a policy that will end up affecting children. And there will be knock-on effects. And I could go on about those as well, such as increased competition for popular state schools. It may not happen right now when you transfer, if someone has to transfer all of their children out and they're not in a year group that's receiving, say year 6 to year 7, coming into reception. If you have to transfer out of the standard process, you may not find a place, right? And so they may say, oh, there's no effect. Councils across the country believe that they've got plenty of places to accommodate students. I did an FOI in December, and the message was, actually, we've got several, it's okay, we can absorb it. But the challenge with that is this: when you drill down to that, a place is a place for a local authority. And I understand that, right? They cannot be critical against any of the schools of which they manage, and that's fine. And some schools are truly struggling and they need help, right? Not judgment. They need help, not judgment. And so that's one of the reasons they take this approach. But a place is a place. So if there's a place within your borough, somewhere, then they've given you a place, and that is your child's choice. That'll happen in the short run, and I use choice loosely, by the way. But the challenge that they will run into is thinking about future years. When parents are starting to think about, my child is in prep school, and I want to think about senior school, or secondary school as the case may be. Well, wait a minute, maybe I will start prepping them for the 11 plus. We're going to move house and be in catchment of a grammar school or a great comprehensive. So we're just going to use our money to move house. And that's already happening. The Times reported that, I believe, last August, and Financial Times around the same time, around seeing parents making that calculation and saying, is this cost benefit worth it? If I'm being penalized with a 20% tax onto my already expensive school fees, why don't I just actually buy a bigger house? If past is any indication of future, house prices go up anyway, to some extent, so why don't I do that? And so parents are doing it, and you're already seeing competition. So what does that mean? You quite simply have more children competing for places in the same state school. So as I said, my son, not out of our first choice, is already going through the whole year 6, year 7 process now, because we need a plan B. As I said, we want to be able to stay, but we just don't yet know, and are doing our level best, but we as parents have to plan. And so what that means is that children like him will take places that others would have wanted, right? Now you think about that in terms of especially particularly popular state schools. So just locally, we've got charter school, for example, right? And the catchment area is quite small. Well, what's going to happen as more parents start moving out and saying, actually, guess what? This is actually going to be the best thing. That catchment will shrink even more, and house prices are going to go up. And what that means is that children who could have gone there will not be able to now. And now they have to make another choice. You can make the same arguments for the 11 plus, right? When more children are sitting the 11 plus, and might I add, more children who are being tutored for the 11 plus, then that increases the risk that a child in a state school who wanted to go there won't be able to, simply because of the maths, right? There are that many more people, there are only so many places, so it just works in that way. So we created, so we're going to get this to work as smoothly. So we created a website, I'll show you at the very end of this, to help make this case, and to help you all make this case, and to help parents across the country to make this case, because ultimately this is a conversation of hearts and minds, and also about education, I would say, in terms of the wider public. I was on an interview just this morning and having a bit of a debate and saying, well, surely some of the parents can afford this, so is it really that bad of a policy, and so on. And so I had to turn it back and say, look, we need this bigger conversation. Not all state schools are equivalent and it can be described in one way, not all independent schools and so forth. Parents are making a range of choices and so on, just as I've said today. And there were people that were for or against, and it's like, well, then which means that if we want to persuade people, which is ultimately what has to happen at the end of the day, then it really is on each of us to be able to do that locally, and as people across the country are doing this. And I do believe, I've lived in the UK for about 20 years this time round. I've lived previously as well. And the British people are, I think, very sensible and rational when it comes to things at the end of the day, on the whole. And so I believe that if we're able to make that case, that this is a human story, this isn't just about trying to save a couple of pence and pounds. This is about real life choices and real life challenges. Also, Labour's own rationale in terms of the policies that they are still developing and the promises that they have made to people who are struggling. It's coming back to all of that. So we've created a website that helps provide resources to do that. We've also got a Facebook group for parents. It's a private Facebook group for people to be able to join in and have conversations there. I will say just very quickly that this will be a policy-focused conversation. We don't want to criticize or praise any particular political parties, because all of us in this room will come from different political backgrounds, and it's not about attacking a particular party, right? So just to point that out. But it's ultimately about those conversations, and that Facebook group is, in my mind, is about how to help each of us to be able to have those, give a bit of advice and think about what to do, and just provide a bit of support, because it can be a bit of a lonely task at the end of the day. And then the other part that I want to leave with for this part is that the Labour Party have been meeting with business leaders and others as they try to shape their tax policies, as any party should do, right? Any party that truly wants to come into government must be able to speak with constituents and interest groups and make sure that the policies that they craft are not only somehow magically different from what the current people are doing, but actually will work. And if Labour have this vision of being able to set to repair the country, to grow the country, and have a 10-year vision of doing that. So to that end, Labour have been having what they call a smoked salmon and scrambled eggs initiative to do this. This is what they've called it, and that's been reported in the FT and a couple of other papers. And so what I want to ask here, and especially for any journalists, is I would like to ask for Sir Keir Starmer, Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves, Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson. I want to invite them to breakfast. At least bacon and eggs. I'm trying to save up for VAT, so the smoked salmon and eggs may not be able to go, but I'll do my best if that's what they wish. But what I call on them, I invite them, I will pay for it, right? I call on them, meet with parents like me and us, and any of you, please, right? To be able to hear our voices, listen to us as they've listened to others, and then look at their own policies as well. And let's work together to look at the bigger problem here. How do we improve the overall education system in this country using the strengths that we've got and trying to bring people together, not pitting them against each other, right? So that's where I will end in terms of what I wanted to deliver. But I do want to take you through our website so you can get a feel of that. The website is called, and if it's there, not there, then we'll swap over if it didn't load. Yep. If you can pull the cable out. So our campaign is called Education Not Taxation, Parents Against School Fee VAT. And the website itself is literally educationnot.taxation.org. And, okay, bear with me. I may have to move it across the window. Nope, yep, okay, that's fine. Bear with me just a bit. Getting used to these extended screens is a bit of a challenge for me, but we'll get there. Okay. So this is the landing page for it, and just describing who we are, what we're about, why this issue matters. And again, I just want to emphasize that we are not a party political group. This is not about just the politics of it. It is about this issue and the effect that it will have on working families and children in particular. And so that's what we're describing here. It also includes a selection of family profiles. Sorry, bear with me with the mouse. Now, I gave you a couple of examples today. This one is an example just from my family story, and then a couple of others here that you can read at your leisure. On the change.org petition, I would encourage you to have a look there as well, because there are many stories there. And I couldn't include all of them, but I wanted to get a representative breadth of these stories to show, look, these are not people that are, again, trying to become the, barons and the like. There are people with many different difficult situations that have made the difficult choice to do the best, like any parent would do, that they could for their child. That's what this is about. And also, then just talking about some of the problems with the maths. Bear with me.
The third one.
Sorry?
The third one, VAT math.
The VAT maths, yes, but I'm trying to find my own mouse arrow. Does anyone see it?
Yep, stop right-hand corner.
Yes, I see it. Sorry. This is the joys of extended screens. I thought I could do two things at once here. So now this gets into some of the issues in terms of the study that is underpinning this policy. So this gets into a bit more detail that I talked to you about, that they're saying, look, everything they've seen, 3 to 7%, schools can deal with that. And what's 3 to 7% of children that are moving out? No big deal. And this is also explaining about, what I outlined, but this goes into a bit more detail. It cites other sources that you can explore in this. There's a blog called The Economics with Mr. Chips, which I highly recommend, which gets into a bit more of this. So this gives you a bit more information on the math. This isn't just about me sitting here and whinging about not wanting to pay £1 or £2. And so the other part of this is around how can I help, and bear with me, there it is, okay. And sorry, and this is the last one. So this one is, just as I mentioned, ultimately this is about winning hearts and minds. So a few things. Number one, if you haven't already, please consider signing the petition. There's a link to it just there. Please consider sharing it far and wide through your social media, through community organizations. Share it far and wide. Consider that. Also, we want as many people to to be informed, and this website will help in terms of what's, as I mentioned about with the maths or other developments of this. It also provides some further information below about why this matters. The other part that I will ask each of you to consider doing, and that is to write to your MP as well as candidates of other parties. I had a conversation with someone earlier today, and they were saying, look, in terms of MPs, the MPs are interested in looking at this, but they need to hear from us. And if enough parents and enough others affected can share those stories with them, then that helps show this is an issue that matters. Then we start getting into conversations such as parliamentary time and other parts like that to be able to really dig into this and question some of the assumptions and really explore it. Now, I do not have a template letter here, and the reason for that is because for this to work, it needs to be your own story. If MPs get 600 copies of the same email, then it just goes into a spam box, or what they might have is an auto reply that says, thank you for your for reaching us. We will post our response to questions on our website. One response for however many thousands, right? And it gets kind of avoided. So write them personally to share your experience, and also consider respectfully, please, interacting with them on social media as well, to make the case, because that's harder for them to get past, like with spam filters and the like. But again, I will urge each of you to be positive and respectful and focused on this issue. As easy it is on X and the like to go after people or troll them. Don't do that, please. That will not help with what we are trying to achieve. And also speak with people across. So wherever you are, whoever your constituent MP or candidates, go across whichever party is running now, because this needs to be across the parties, right? We need a conversation that goes beyond, pro-labor, anti-labor, or whatever it may be. Again, I mentioned about joining our Facebook group. And also, I would ask you consider sharing your expertise. If anyone has legal background, PR, IT, those sorts of things, and you have a bit of time that you would like to be able to contribute to, that would be greatly appreciated, to make sure that we are always keeping our best foot forward in being able to do this. I've also added some key messages here, so going back to the point about your letters to MPs or writing to your paper, write an op-ed. Just a short letter even, right? So a couple hundred words, if that. And these are some key messages that you can consider, and make sure that you incorporate your own concerns, right? And your own story, I would ask. So that is the overall part. There's a contact us form, which I'm not going to struggle with to do. But literally, if anyone has any questions, would like any more information, then please contact us through there. It'll come to me. And as I say, please also consider joining our Facebook group. Now, I will also point out that at the bottom of the very bottom of the page, we do have social media links for Facebook, X or Twitter, and also a YouTube channel which will be able to record, bring events like this. So we are recording this with the idea of being able to share that more widely as well. And so as we developed, and also anyone who has time or interest and would like to help provide support, we've got like a WhatsApp group of parents too that kind of bounce ideas, more than welcome for that. And then the last point that I will make is as I've touched on, your own stories and the stories of parents across the country is absolutely crucial to this. There are journalists who are who would love to be able to hear from you and your story. And actually, if anyone would be willing to share their story, actually, please speak with me afterwards, because I'm trying to find a few for a piece. And it's very easy to do. I've done this a few times now. And journalists are very friendly people. They're not out trying to get you, and just show the human side of this, right? And that's it, right? That's it at the end of the day. And also, so yes, if anyone would be willing to share stories, please come to me. Let me know. Because I have a couple I need to let other journalists that are asking me too. So they're asking, do you know of any other people? So that would be a huge help. So that covers everything for now. And I will gladly take any questions, but if you want to stop the recording part, probably now, because I don't know